But first, 1 hour to debate a substantial point. It's Frontex. Recent allegations on pushbacks during Frontex operation in the Eastern Mediterranean. You are aware that we have a very good reason to be concerned about it. There have been allegations of pushbacks during Frontex operation in the Mediterranean. Media outlets published October the 23rd an investigation with allegations concerning those pushbacks and infringement of fundamental rights is underway. 4th November, I, as your chair, sent a letter with written questions to the director of Frontex, Fabbrice Lετζερί. Last week, we received his replies to these questions. They have been distributed to you all. You have them. You have also received, November the 12th, a note directly from the management board of Frontex regarding the 6 cases which are reported in the press. So we have a very good reason here to engage in a talk, in a serious talk with our director of Frontex, Fabbrice Lετζερί. Monsieur Lετζερί, vous êtes là, en connexion?
Are you online, Mr. Lετζερί?
Monsieur le Président.
Soyez le bienvenu, Monsieur Lετζερί.
Welcome, Mr. Lετζερί. You're in Warsaw, I believe. Yes, indeed. Okay, the floor is yours for 10 minutes. We will listen to you, and then there will be a speaking list. Over to you. Thank you very much, Chair.
And good afternoon, honorable members of the Parliament. So I would like first to set the scene and the operational environment in order to answer the questions regarding alleged pushbacks in the Eastern Mediterranean in the context of Frontex operational activities. First, I would like to say that in the beginning of March, we had to launch 2 rapid border intervention Evros at the land border between Greece and Turkey, and a rapid border intervention agent, the maritime operation that started on the 12th of March. And there was a great support of all member states and the EU institutions that encouraged also Frontex to quickly deploy these rapid border interventions. The rapid border intervention agent is the maritime one, and the purpose of this was to top up joint operation Poseidon with more staff, more technical equipment, and it lasted until the 6th of September. And we had 27 member states participating in these activities. We also had the possibility, as Frontex, as an agency, to contribute with our own technical equipment, meaning the possibility to have plane for border surveillance. The operational plan and the operational objectives were the same as joint operation Poseidon. So there was no separate operational objective. The commanding structure was the same, so that means that the operational command, tactical command, lies with the host member states, which in this case is Greece. We have the International Coordination Center located in Piraeus, where the Hellenic Coast Guard has its seat, which is in fact the international commanding structure, coordinating structure for this. On the vessels that we deploy, we have liaison officers which are deployed by the host member states, so Greek liaison officers on the vessels, deployed, for example, by Portugal, Romania, etc. We have, of course, commanders, national commanders, there on the vessels, and Frontex is represented in the International Coordination Center. We have our Frontex coordination officer. We also have, at the level of the local coordination centers on the islands, our own coordinators. But Frontex has not the command on the operation. Then, what are the operational objectives? And in particular, I would like to highlight that there is Regulation 656/2014, which is relevant for this operation, as this is a maritime operation conducted by Frontex. The objectives, as set by the operational plan Poseidon, that remain the same for the Rapid Border Intervention Agent, is all about detection of irregular crossings, border surveillance, support to search and rescue if there are search and rescue cases. It's all about, otherwise, let's say, cross-border crime, prevention, detection of cross-border crime at the border, as well as, let's say, the fight against smuggling activities, trafficker in human beings. So that's the objective of the operational plan. Regulation 656/2014 is very important to understand. Two cases, two different situations are indicated here. Either there are search and rescue cases. If this is search and rescue, then this reason prevails, and then everything is done in accordance and coordinated by the search and rescue, the Maritime Coordination Center. If no search and rescue case is declared by the competent authorities, then there is a possibility to carry out interception at the borders. So interception, and this is regulated by the articles of 656/2014 regulation. Interception can take place when there is a case of boat trying to circumvent border crossing points at sea. I mean that they try to escape from the border checks, or if there are good reasons to think that a boat is engaged in smuggling of migrants by sea. So in this case, the possibility is that the host member state, so in this case Greece, but it would be the same in other places, that the host member state of Frontex operation can order either to apprehend or that the vessel, the suspicious boat, could be, let's say, invited to change its course. So that's the regulation. What are the reporting lines in Frontex operations in general and in particular in this one? We have the Joint Operation Report Application, the so-called JORA. This is a report compiled by the host member state based on mission reports, for example, that are shared by participating member states, participating vessels, and then this is sent by the host member state, so in this case by Greece, to Frontex headquarters in Warsaw, where this is screened by the Frontex Situation Center. Then either we validate or we don't validate the daily joint operation report. If we don't validate, it means that we ask additional questions because either there are technical details which are missing or are wrong or confusing. And this is an important step, as I will explain you later. So this is not just about rubber stamping, but we have evidences that we do exercise scrutiny on that. There are other reporting lines, the serious incident report. Here I have to say that according to our Frontex procedures, which are recognized by all participating member states, every participant has the duty to issue a serious incident report if he or she believes, for example, that there is a violation of fundamental rights happening in the context of the operations. We have evidences, examples, that this mechanism has worked. For example, there was in July a Danish helicopter pilot who issued or wanted to issue a serious incident report. Then we heard about this, we were informed in Frontex. And so this is one example. Another recent example was that the crew of a Swedish vessel end of October issued directly a serious incident report. There are 4 categories of serious incident reports. One of them, category 4, is related to violation of fundamental rights. There are other categories which are related either to incidents involving or not involving staff of Frontex or deployed by Frontex, or involving a crisis situation, political situation of interest. There is also an ad hoc reporting, which is always possible. So let's say that this is the translation of the whistleblowing procedure into the operational environment. It is not called whistleblowing, but the mechanism is the same. It's a little bit outdated. It was before we had in the agency a whistleblowing mechanism, but the result is the same, is that anybody can directly report in any form. We have seen during our inquiry that we are able to retrieve records so that it's possible to trace, to a certain extent, the activities, operational activities conducted by the vessels and the assets and the staff participating in Frontex operation. Now coming to the alleged pushbacks and Frontex inquiry and Frontex action in other cases that were not reported by the media. In the 6 cases that were reported by media on the 23rd of October, I'm referring to Der Spiegel, ARD, Bellingcat, and the media participating with this group. In fact, we have, based on the report that was shared, we have not found evidence that there were active, direct or indirect participation of Frontex staff or officers deployed by Frontex in pushbacks during either Poseidon or Rapid Border Intervention Agent. So we were able to trace the dates and to confirm that in the time slots, on the days, the assets that were mentioned, in particular the Romanian vessels and the Portuguese vessels were indeed deployed, but there was no evidence that they were engaged in pushbacks activities. In one occurrence, this was a Frontex flight on the 28th and 29th April, so this was an alleged contribution to pushbacks. In fact, the flight, there was no Frontex flight on that night, it was before. But I will come back to the flight because it's important to know that, in fact, we were able to detect autonomously 2 suspicious situations that I reported to Greek authorities. The first one occurred in the night from the 18th to the 19th of April. A serious incident report was issued. Frontex surveillance flight, let's say, spotted, and we have live streaming, so we can, from the headquarters in Warsaw, also see what's going on. And we detected suspicious situations, so we could see suspicious movements, unusual movements, migrants, Turkish vessel, Hellenic Coast Guard vessels. We were not participating at sea in this, so there was no maritime asset deployed by Frontex there. But thanks to the fact that Frontex planes, the ones we released directly, have live streaming possibility, we could spot this, and otherwise it would not have been possible even to know about that. I was reported this because there was a serious incident report, and the situation was a little bit strange. So in a context where there were many confrontations, geopolitical confrontation, I just would like to say that a couple of days before, 1 month before, 2 F-16 fighters, Turkish military fighters, had surrounded a Danish plane working for Frontex in the Greek airspace. We had, as of end of April, almost daily shootings coming from the Turkish side at the land border when Frontex patrol were operating. So in that context, and given the fact that Greek authorities had said that they are facing a hybrid threat and that national security is at stake in some occurrence, I decided to escalate this suspicious case that we spotted to the Greek minister in charge of maritime affairs. The letter was signed, my letter was signed on the 8th of May, and his reply was dated 10th of July. I escalated because there was a very strange situation, suspicion that perhaps something was wrong regarding fundamental rights, but also that perhaps something was wrong regarding the security or a military incident that was ongoing. There was another case that was not reported by the media, and this was the Danish helicopter. On the 27th of July, the Danish pilot of this helicopter wanted to issue a serious incident report, as I told you, and there was a discussion in the International Cooperation Center, so the one that has the command in Piraeus. They had a discussions during the briefing in order to know whether it's worth or not to issue a serious incident report. But the agency was informed, the headquarters were informed, and my decision was to sign a letter to the commander of the Hellenic Coast Guard to ask him, what is this? So in both cases, I asked the Greek minister and the Hellenic Coast Guard commander to investigate and to let me know what is the result of these investigations. Then, what are the next steps after the first inquiry about the situations that were reported by the media? We further reviewed serious incident reports since the beginning of the year, as well as JOHA, so you know this report, Joint Operation Report application. And in particular, we focused on JOHA reports that were not finalized because an answer was still pending. We were waiting for Greek authorities to reply to some questions. What we identified is that there are some notions like prevention of departure. The common factor in all these not closed, let's say, incident reports, which are not serious incident reports, but are the daily reports, the JOHA report, the common factor is that there is a description of a prevention of departure, and that there are interceptions, but they were not reported or no serious, no search and rescue situation was declared. So if you remember back to this regulation 656/2014, two cases, two operational situations are either we are in a search and rescue case and then it's search and rescue and nothing else. If it's not search and rescue, it's an interception at the border, and then there is a possibility either to apprehend or to legally invite the boat not to cross irregularly the border, but to change its course and not to stay or to enter in the national waters. So what is, in fact, we have now a set of, let's say,
Excuse me, Mr. Yes? Ledzerί, Director yes. Ledzerί, please. It was scheduled 10 minutes and you'll be speaking 15, and there are two lists of speakers willing to address questions to you, and you should have the right to answer them. So please, if you may rush up into some conclusion or wind up, we thank you for that, because time is essential more than ever before in these circumstances of us, in these conditions in which we are working some months now. Please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So I will conclude in saying that because of this situational, these operational situations that we cannot qualify, and we don't know how to qualify them legally, I requested from the Commission, and the Management Board also is involved, to analyze and give a legal interpretation of this Regulation 656/2014 on the one hand, and also because there were some situations where security of the host member states and defense was invoked, or we had some kind of, let's say, unusual situation with, as I said, F-16 surrounding our vessels deployed by Finland and Romania being surrounded and harassed by, Coast Guard from the neighboring third country. Shootings at the land border from the side of the third country on to us. So because of all this situation, I also asked the Commission, but also the EU institutions, to give me political guidance and legal interpretation and guidance on how to take into account so-called hybrid threats when security or defense is at stake where we are physically deployed. So I would simply say that concerning the fundamental rights, we are developing and improving, of course, the monitoring of the fundamental rights. I have to explain, and you remember probably, that 1 year ago, I published the vacancy notice for fundamental rights officer and deputy fundamental rights officer, which would have allowed to then recruit the fundamental rights officer at the managerial post and then to recruit on time the 40 monitors, fundamental rights monitors. I was asked to withdraw the vacancy notice for fundamental rights officer and deputy fundamental rights officer. And then it took many months of discussions with, let's say, commission services in order to determine whether this is a managerial post or not, and also how to organize all the setting in the agency to ensure the full independence of the fundamental rights officer and its staff, and on the other hand, the full compliance with the financial regulatory framework of an EU agency where the executive director is the authorizing officer, where the executive director needs to get the discharge procedure from the EU budget authority. So this was a lengthy discussion, and I regret that because of that, we were not able to beef up on time the fundamental rights monitors and the fundamental rights office. And in order to mitigate these shortcomings, and I'm fully aware that they are shortcomings, I decided to propose to Fundamental Rights Agency, in close cooperation with the Fundamental Rights Officer at interim that we have, I proposed to have monitors deployed as soon as possible by the Fundamental Rights Agency, so made available that we would pay, and that would be managed by the Fundamental Rights Officer at interim. We also identified improvement in the training, for sure, and I'm ready to answer questions. I'm sure that there will be questions. So sorry, I was too long, but now I'm ready to take the questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and sorry again, I was too long.
You doubled the time, actually, but it's an essential point. My only concern is that we got to go like this. I've got 2 speaking lists. So please, the first floor will go to the spokespersons by every political group, 2 minutes each, and then it'll be a second round of speakers, 1 minute each, so that Director Lετζερί will be able to answer properly each and every question raised, because this is the point, to make questions, not long speeches, but actual questions, demanding the accountability of the agency, which is relevant, so relevant for our concerns. Okay, we get started with EPP. It'll be 2 minutes for Lena Dupont.
Yes, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Mr. Lετζερί, for the more or less brief overview of the current debates, and special thanks also for providing the members of this committee with the information requested. Frontex is at the heart of many European politics, and therefore we fully support the agency and their mandate. At the same time, Frontex is operating in a challenging context, especially when we look at the Aegean and the Mediterranean Sea, dealing with a neighbor that is willing to misuse people in order to attack the European Union, and that, especially in the last weeks and months, had been even more provocative and threatening, is not an easy task in itself. So in this regard, could you please elaborate a bit more on the general geopolitical context of the mission, including the hybrids and theories, threats and scenarios you just mentioned? Second, and quite in line with that, could you please provide more information on the serious incidents on the ground where Frontex assets and staff deployed were attacked and threatened by Turkish soldiers, as the German Spiegel had also reported? And looking a bit more closely to the operational and legislative ground for Frontex, and by means of improving both practice and legal basis, there's only a fine line between incidents being in the nature of interceptions or under the interpretation as search and rescue cases. Could you please tip on that point a bit further concretely? What are the provisions of the regulation you also mentioned on border surveillance that needs to be clarified? And what does it concretely mean that the host member states keep the tactical command of Frontex joint operation? And the last question, from your point of view, how can we strengthen and uphold fundamental rights while at the same time safeguard the operational freedom for Frontex that is needed in their daily business? And how can we further promote and actively encourage member states to the international and European law and the upholding of that? Thanks.
Thank you, Madame Dupont. You've raised actually questions, which we appreciate so much. The next floor goes to our colleague Kati Piri. If you are there connected, the floor goes to you, please. Yes, you are.
Yes, I am. Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Ledzeri, as you know, the practice of pushbacks has been a matter of concern, big concern, to the members of this committee for a long time already. But you were always there to reassure us that there was nothing to worry about. You first talked about misunderstandings in your July hearing, then you talked about media reports of which you could not find any proof, and later you explained it as a politicization of the operational theatre in the Aegean Sea. And in the meantime, more and more reports were coming up. Now, I will focus on a few crucial questions. You repeatedly said that Frontex must rely on the assessments of member states and cannot investigate member state activities. At the same time, pushbacks obviously happened in front of your own officers. A clear example is the Greek pushback on the 19th of April, which was detected by a Frontex aircraft. This happened during a Frontex operation. Now, in your view, is it sufficient to send a letter to the Greek authorities and believe them when they state all is fine, when actually you have the obligation to terminate any activity of the agency if the conditions to conduct those activities are no longer fulfilled, as is stated in Article 46 of the Frontex mandate? And why did you not mention this in your hearing in front of this committee in July? A second question, there were indeed very few incidents, serious incidents, reported by your own officers. What makes you certain that this is a good sign, instead of a sign that Frontex officers are actually turning a blind eye to these activities? And finally, you just said a couple of words on that. Under the new Frontex mandate, you have a clear obligation to recruit fundamental right monitors. Why did you not comply with your agency's mandate? And based on what you just said, what is your responsibility in this failing? Thank you.
Thank you, Cathy. Now it'll go to Sophie Invel for Renew. 2 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Mr. Ledzeri, this is not the first time we are having a debate about allegations of fundamental rights violations where Frontex was somehow involved. And it's becoming very, very awkward, because I'm beginning to wonder how you see your own responsibility. We are talking about human rights violations, about pushbacks, about people at gunpoint, and we get from you a legal interpretation whether or not there was a transgression and who was responsible. I think even as a European citizen, you are responsible to take action. So action taken, like it's been mentioned also by Kati Piri, why not terminate the operation? Why not suspend funding? Why did you think it was sufficient to write letters to the Greek authorities, which have been routinely, systematically denying any allegation, even if there was substantial evidence? You're bringing in other incidents. You're referring to the situation in the Mediterranean and aggression by the Turkish authorities, but that still doesn't absolve you from your responsibility as somebody who is leading 10,000 armed men. We would like to know that we can trust you, and I'm beginning to wonder. About the hiring of the fundamental rights officers, why are you starting only now? You're supposed to hire 40 and we are at 0. Why are you hiring at AST level and not at AD level? AST will not even have the powers to carry out the tasks assigned to them. And a final question, if you cannot have, and this has been a recurring theme for years now, if you cannot have your own assessment of the cases, then how do you think you can fulfill your duties under Article 46? Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. Now it'll go Greens. Tineke Strik.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, indeed, witnessing pushbacks by the Greek authorities, but refraining from action, manipulating or frustrating signals on violations, serious incidents reports, complaints, intercepting boats, followed by pushbacks by governments. Chair, migrants and refugees are very vulnerable to pushbacks by border guards. We must be able to rely on an EU agency which prevents human rights violations from happening and not inflict them. But Frontex seems to be a partner in crime of those who deliberately violate those human rights. According to Article 6, Frontex is accountable to the Parliament and the Council, but Mr. Lετζερί has denied all the concerns that we raised instead of acting upon it. We asked several times for a list of serious incidents reports, but we did not get the full list. For instance, this incident of 18 and 19 April, we were not informed. The Frontex regulation prescribes that the agency must do recommendations, stop funding, withdraw from operations in a certain country. So that means that Frontex has to assess the situation in order to know what to do. So if it comes to signals, if you get signals, and Bellicot is not the first one, what did you do with those signals? Have you ever proactively assessed what's actually going on? And about the future, Parliament has created the obligation to recruit 40 fundamental rights monitors before the end of this week, yet we have no one. And why didn't you prioritize it? And how can we make sure that we get 40 monitors as soon as possible with a full competence and not assistance, because we need to have autonomously operating monitors? Well, Greece is not the only country where Frontex is being accused of complicity with pushbacks. We hear these reports from Croatia and Hungary as well. So a drastic reform is urgently needed. Fundamental rights must become a leading criteria for Frontex operation. We really need a whistleblowing culture, open eyes and ears and engagement. Do you agree that a lot has to be changed? And are you the one who is able to push for those fundamental changes? And a subcommittee of the management board is now going to do an internal inquiry. How can we have confidence in really an independent outcome, taking into account all the frustration of the signals? Why isn't there any role for the Fundamental Rights Agency and other experts? And I would like to call upon all political groups also to really seriously consider if we as a parliament shouldn't establish a formal inquiry committee on this. But let's first hear Mr. Lετζερί.
Okay, thank you, Tineke. Now it'll be Nicola Procaccini for the ECR. You're connected, Nicola. Onorevole Procaccini, in collegamento. Nope. So it'll go right to, well, maybe for ECR, I have listed here as backup Jorge Buxadé. Jorge Buxadé tampoco, ¿verdad? ¿Ah, sí? Jorge Buxadé, sí.
Gracias, presidente. Estaba aquí mi compañero Nicola.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes, well, thank you. The operations that are carried out by Frontex need to respect the law and human rights. I'm afraid the sound quality is not great, but the interpreter will do his best. We shouldn't forget the most important thing here, which is the conditions under which Frontex agents work. And we need to be aware of those when we judge how professional they are in what they're doing. They travel under very difficult conditions, and what we need to do is boost the work of security agencies in member states, also those which depend on the institutions of the European Union. Now, on the cases in the Aegean, well, the Frontex guards and Greek coast guards are protecting our borders in a heroic manner. We're seeing essentially an invasion from Turkey, which is part of the blackmail that Turkey is carrying out on the European Union. I think what we need to do is first and foremost protect our agents, because they are risking their lives to protect our borders. So, Director, you should be aware that there are political groups in the European Parliament who are defending your work and your agents. To conclude, I'd like to ask a question. Has Frontex triggered anything with regard to the Canary Islands? Because lots of illegal migrants have been arriving there. I don't know whether Frontex has received any kind of a request from Spain, or are preparatory actions being undertaken to control the flows of illegal migrants to the Canary Islands. Thank you.
Señor Buxadé, Pasamos a la señora Rego de GUE. Sira Rego, ¿conectada? Tiene la palabra. Sira Rego.
Hola, sí, muchas gracias.
Hello, thank you, Chairman. Well, I must confess that I really was looking forward to hearing from the director, but unfortunately what we've seen is that Mr. Lejeri has simply stuck to the positions that we've previously heard. He continues to deny Frontex's involvement in pushbacks in spite of the fact that there is evidence that has been provided by the media. I've even got a couple of videos where you can clearly see Frontex's participation. I'd be very happy to get them to you if you like. But I think what's of more concern is that he continues to desperately cling on to this interpretation of complying with international law on human rights. It seems that for you, the intervention of a military vessel at night facing a plastic vessel full of people and pushing it back to Turkish waters is within the framework of human rights. It seems that people don't deserve to be rescued when their ship is about to go down because they are coming to a certain country. I don't think that this interpretation is in line with the rule of law and the basic tenets of democracy. Please don't forget that the European Parliament, is the democratic house of the people of Europe. So I'm afraid this isn't good enough. Please, we need some answers because these aren't isolated incidents. Frontex is involved in these kinds of events right all over Greece and Albania. So please, could we have access to the reports so that we could check to see whether these other cases have also violated human rights and international law? I'm also wondering which part of the regulation states that it is legal to be involved in pushback. And to conclude, let me say that a few weeks ago I sent you a letter which I haven't had a response to, and I asked that social organisations involved in defending human rights and members from other political involved in that, from different political groups, could be involved in that. I hope that you can go further than simply your investigations because you are there judging yourselves. We need to ensure that there are impartial procedures in place to judge what's going on. Now, given your responses, which have been evasive to say the least, I think you should resign, sir. Please, could speakers stick to 2 minutes because we have a second speakers list.
Still have a second round of speakers listed, which will have a minute each. But let's finish with non-anscrit. It'll be Kostas Papadakis. Kostas Papadakis, yes.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will speak in Greek. Η μετάθεση ευθυνών και ισχυρισμών.
The fact that the Greek government and the Hellenic Coast Guard on the other hand and Frontex on the other side are shuffling their responsibilities between them means that there is a serious problem. The Greek government and authorities have to respond against these allegations with data, because we have allegations that human lives are in danger. However, we can also see something else. We have Frontex in place, which is an international military mechanism of the EU. That does not mean that borders are defended. We see that the exact opposite is happening. So, Mr. Lejeri, my question is this. What would you say about the fact that Frontex itself seems to be involved in pushbacks of migrants and refugees, whereas the European Union has given you an even larger role in the new closed centers under this new agreement on migration, and we are very worried because we are now listening about new monitors that are going to work uncontrolled at the borders. Secondly, the fact that Frontex exists means that each member state cannot now have the sovereign rights to protect its borders.
Now, if you may, the only way to proceed, I'm sorry, it'll be to open a second round of 1 minute, and we'll still have some time for the responses we are expecting for. So please have it in mind, phrase it in 1 minute. It'll be EPP, Nathalie Colin-Osterlé, c'est ça? Nathalie? Vous êtes là?
Est-ce que vous m'entendez?
On vous écoute, on vous entend.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Lετζερί, for your explanations. They're always very clear. Frontex has been accused in October of being involved in pushbacks. 6 cases. This undermines Frontex's image. Now, your work is to fight criminality, manage our external borders, etc., and that helps European citizens to circulate freely in the Schengen area. The Fundamental Rights Officer has been sent to Greece to investigate. Do you have any further elements subsequent to these on-the-ground investigations? Now, the new regulation for Frontex envisages a monitoring mechanism when it comes to looking at the use of force by the permanent body. There was a report. This was transferred to the Commission. What information have you had back from them? Now, do you think, in addition, the scope should be enlarged and also a better definition of interception at sea? Would that be useful? And finally, there's violence on the Greek-Turkish border. Tear gas, rocket launches have been carried out from Turkey, and also there have been destabilization efforts on land, at sea and in the air. These are genuine threats. How is Frontex prepared for that? And do you have the resources necessary to apply a zero-tolerance policy?
Is Tania Fayon, are you there, connected? Tania? Nope? Yes, she is. Floor goes to you, Tania.
Ms. Fanjo, please press the speak button.
Speak button.
Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, thank you. Let me just stress once again that we are not just shocked by the reports, but we are also saddened by them. And those incidents, firing, shots at people, destroying boat engines, putting people back in boats and towing them away. In fact, we are speaking about pushbacks. And the European Union and one of their agencies are tolerating that. And this is what is happening. And that, of course, raises a question of the rule of law. And we all know well that rule of law has become some kind of a joke, apparently. So this is what fits the patterns of years and years of violence at the borders we are witnessing also between Croatia and Bosnia. But just a question for the director. Of course, the director has its responsibility. Again, did you know about these incidents? And if not, this raises questions on how do you control and monitor Frontex operations? And did the management board know about them and how they do their job? Now, how do you feel about Frontex corps and operations being asked by the Greek authorities to leave the areas where incidents supposedly happened? What do you say on the replies from Greek authorities when they say everything is fine with their operation? So what is definitely sure is we need more democratic control, and this is what we are demanding in the European Parliament in all our meetings with Frontex in order to be briefed on all ongoing operations. Thank you.
Tania, maintenant, c'est Fabien Keller de Renew. Vous avez 1 minute, on vous en prie.
Fabienne Keller for the Renew Group now. 1 minute, please. Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Lετζερί, Director General. Well, we are struck in your explanations by the operational dimension that you describe at sea with vessels, threats. There's a very operational aspect which is significant, I think. Now, 3 questions. Could you tell us more about the command structure during these operations? Who was in the vessels? Is it the member state intervening, or are there Frontex people there? Who is involved in the chain of command, who takes operational decisions? Second question, you talked about hybrid threats, risks, particularly on the Greek-Turkish border, so military-style threats. Could you tell us a little bit more about those? And then a further question, how do you get organized to ensure the remit of the fundamental rights officer? And then a further question, given what colleagues have said, don't you think it would be necessary to have monitoring from the Parliament, so closer monitoring of your actions and your developments, because Frontex carries out extremely important missions pursuant to its new mandate? Thank you.
Merci, Fabian. Und jetzt, es ist Eric Marquardt, der Grüne.
Eric Marquardt from the Greens now. 1 minute, please.
Ja, vielen Dank. Ich wollte einleiten ganz.
Well, yes, thank you. Just to begin, let me say that I was very pleased with the reports that the journalists carried out. So I'd like to thank those journalists because they were shocking, they were sad, but it's good that journalists uncover these kinds of things if they're happening. I mean, we have press freedom, so that's important. So first question, were there any errors in the reporting? Is any of it not true? That would be my first question. The second question, is everything running as programmed? I mean, that seems to be the impression you get when we listen to you. Third question, member states say, for example, you prevented a trip, someone arriving. I mean, is that something that has taken place in Greek waters? I mean, the sound quality is not great for Mr. Marquardt, I'm afraid. So this third question is not possible to interpret.
Die vorletzte Frage.
A further question.
An den Außengrenzen, die wie mit ihnen umgegangen werden muss, ist seit.
I'm afraid Mr. Marquardt's sound quality is not good enough for the interpreters.
Und ich würde mich schon fragen, wo die Unklarheit besteht bei der Seeaußengrenzenverordnung. Wollen Sie da Dinge tun, die momentan vom Recht nicht abgedeckt sind? Also wollen Sie?
Are you trying to do things that aren't covered by the regulation? Are you trying to do things that aren't covered so far by the regulation? That seems to be perhaps my impression. And then I have a further question. Going back to the 11th of November, you said that I'm afraid the sound quality is just simply not good enough for Mr. Marquardt. The interpreter apologizes.
Es ist nicht allgemein gut, Tote zu verhindern, dass sie das immer so tun. Also Schiff informieren statt nur zum Beispiel der libyschen Seenotrettungsleitstelle, wo in der Folge ja Menschen auch in Haftlager und unmenschliche Bedingungen kommen. Warum informieren Sie nicht allgemein, wenn es Seenotrettungsfälle gibt, immer die Schiffe in der Umgebung?
Danke, Herr Marquardt. Trotz, wir haben nicht sehr gut Sie gehört. So,
the chairman says we didn't hear Mr. Marquardt very well.
Speaker in my list, will be adesso apparentemente onorevole Procaccini.
Apparently, we now have a connection with Mr. Procaccini. Are you there, sir? Are you ready?
Ecco.
Sì, Presidente.
Yes, Chairman, thank you. I'm having connection problems today, it's true, alas. Well, I'd like to thank the Director General. I get the feeling that he is yet again being put on trial in this committee, and that seems like a shame to me. I think he is paying for the fact that he is telling the truth about NGOs which operate at sea and are a clear pull factor for migrants. Now, I would have preferred you to be called to this committee to talk about why the numbers of landings have tripled on European coasts this year. And we've also got the pandemic as a context for all of that. Instead of that, though, we're yet again putting you on trial. I'd like to express my solidarity to Frontex, but also to the Greek authorities, because it's one thing to sit here and speak from our ivory tower. It's quite another to speak when you're there on the ground carrying out a very sensitive, very difficult activity, as you are. I think the goal should be shifted here. We shouldn't be looking at journalistic indiscretions. We should be talking about massive issues such as geopolitical issues raised by Turkey in the Mediterranean. Hearing you talk about hybrid threats really gives me goosebumps. So I think these are the main. This is the massive issue we should be talking about, rather than journalistic gossip. Thank you.
Malin Björk for the GUE, and then we will be back to the director Ledzeri for answers.
Hello. Well, I think the fact that the only speaker so far that actually has welcomed Frontex, let's say, account of things is the extreme right, the ones that wants to dismantle democracy and close the borders and don't respect international law and human rights. So that's actually says something. And I also want to thank journalists and tireless NGOs that document what is happening at EU borders, because in the absence of any, reasonable monitoring mechanism for fundamental rights, this is what we have. So I want to thank you publicly. And I must say that this scrutiny is so important because it's just a start, because we need more accountability and more political responsibility when it comes to Frontex dealings and how you are acting at EU borders. So I was in September at Lesbos, and the head of the operations and the GNC from Frontex said they hadn't seen anything. He even forgot about the Danish case at the time. And he said nothing. So with all this sophisticated equipment, the vessels, the assets, and the personnel, nothing had they seen, he said. Well, it turned out not to be true, of course, but it's worse then, because you were complicit and aware about what is happening. So there's a huge responsibility that is legitimizing the violence that we see at borders and in the Greek Sea, but also at the land border. So my question is, why have you not used Article 46 and suspended Frontex participation when it became obvious that illegal pushbacks were taking place? This is a joint operation. You have totally the possibility. Again, why have you not launched your own investigations into the reports of violence and pushbacks at sea and land border? It's a joint operation. You have the possibility and you have the responsibility to do that. And how do you see the fact that, like in my case, the Swedish participation in Frontex had been asked not to make a report? This shows that the serious incidents reporting system doesn't work, and there are very, very few. So my question is, how are you going to improve that? And what do you say about, what's your assessment about that when officers are told to don't report that, so, don't come up with those, that's only making trouble. Those are my questions. And I also want to say that legally speaking, the answers from the Greek government, how do you assess those in legal terms? Because for me, they're trying to reinterpret and distort EU and international law. Thank you.
Thank you, Björk. Now, let's be clear about this. We have a usual situation. We got to start a so-called inter-parliamentary conference on Eurojust right afterwards, right after this point has been completed. And we also have the condition of the interpretation cabin, be it a joint venture between the European Parliament and national parliaments as well. So I suggest Director Ledzeri tries his very best to respond the questions that have been addressed directly to him for the next 5 minutes. And of course, we expect complementary answers. We are exceeding the scheduled time for this point, but we expect complementary answers in writing to all of the rest of the questions that have been addressed and cannot have a satisfactory reply in this point of time. So please note that we are expecting to do your best in the next 5 minutes, otherwise we are in trouble with all the rest of the agenda, and put in writing the answers that have been requested by the members in the legitimate exercise of scrutiny on Frontex agency. Okay, floor goes back to you, Director Ledzeri.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all members of the Parliament for the question. I will try to focus on some points. First, the command and control. The tactical command lies with the host member state, which means that in any activity in real time, only the host member state authorities can decide what has to be done. And for example, when I hear that some members of the Parliament wonder why a plane deployed by Frontex or a vessel deployed by Frontex is instructed to leave the area because the Hellenic Coast Guard is taking over the situation, if the question was if I find that this is normal, according to our mandate, according to the existing legislation, this is a normal way to operate. Because we, I mean, the vessels, the planes, all the operation which is deployed in the host member state is under the command of the host member state. The operational plan is agreed between the agency and the host member state, and then it's binding on all participants. So that's an important point to understand. When it comes to the legal framework, I hear that some of the members of the parliament say they are pushbacks, but they are questions about interception. Search and rescue is not a question when there is a search and rescue case or when a search and rescue situation is declared, either because there is a call or because the coordination center or the Coast Guard say that this is a search and rescue, then of course it's search and rescue and nothing else. But this was not the case in the operational situations that were discussed today, either in the media, the 6 cases, or the ones I brought to the knowledge of the members of the parliament and the members of the management board. And that we are looking at, because this is crucial to understand if Regulation 656 is clear or if we need additional guidance, either a legal interpretation or if in some kind of standard operating procedure, things should be clarified. I think this is extremely important because what is at stake is the ability to perform the border surveillance at sea. And border surveillance is not only about migrants or refugees, it's also about criminal activities, it's also about risk of terrorism. So this is important to keep in mind, important to clarify. When it comes to the ability to change in the agency, to change the culture, and in particular, I would focus on the fundamental rights dimension of the agency. I simply would like to say that 5 years ago, we had only 2 persons in the Fundamental Rights Office. Now we have 10, and the budget that is proposed, that was this year, was 500,000 euro, and I proposed to the management board 1.3 million for next year. Why are we late in the recruitment of the Fundamental Rights Officer? For one simple reason. 1 year ago, I published a vacancy notice. I was forced to withdraw it because it was said that it's not a managerial post. While I had the opportunity 1 year ago to explain to your assembly, honorable members of the parliament, because there was a question about this, I explained that a person who has to manage 50 people and up to 2 million euro per year is a managerial post. Now, it took months for commission services to understand this situation. And then there was a set of management board decisions to be adopted that I proposed that were rejected in discussions with some legal services interpreting in a different way and never giving me an answer when I should and how we could articulate properly, on the one hand, the independence of the Fundamental Rights Officer and his or her staff, on the one hand, and on the other hand, the financial regulations. So I'm sorry that we are so late with the 40 monitors, and on the top of that, our establishment plan was reduced, which means that 100 posts were taken away from Frontex and replaced by AST posts, which explains also why we have to recruit a mix of AD and AST posts. Concerning the geopolitical dimension, I explained the examples. Well, some vessels, for example, at sea, deployed by Frontex, one Finnish vessel, one Romanian vessel, were harassed. These were incidents that lasted between 1 hour and 2 hours, and this happened in the Greek territorial waters. As we all know, there is a border dispute between Greece and Turkey, which makes things even more complicated because they don't use the same maps. but there are also unilateral declarations of different groups of countries. You may remember that Turkey and Libya concluded an agreement regarding a specific zone at sea, and Greece and Egypt concluded similar agreements. If you look at the map, you understand that there is a problem. There are different zones overlapping. This is not easy to be operational in this kind of areas, which, by the way, concerns also the search and rescue zone. According to Turkey, Lesbos and all the islands where we are deployed are completely in the search and rescue zone of Turkey, while Greece says, now, this is in the Greek search and rescue zone. So I think this gives some information about the complexity of this geopolitical situation. What I would like to say about the serious incident report and the reporting mechanism. We have, within the mandate, I consider that the headquarters, and I consider that I have grip on what's going on the field. And the best example is precisely the one that now is used to accuse that the agency tries to cover a situation. The incident that happened in the night between the 18th and 19th of April was the Frontex plane with the live streaming detecting suspicious situation at night. And normally, if we had here, instead of our plane, if we had a plane deployed by a member state without live streaming, we would have only paid for that, but never we could know what was the situation really that was developing. And because the footage was sufficiently worrying from different perspectives, from the perspective of fundamental rights, risk of, let's say, refoulement, maritime refoulement to a third country, or for perspective of, let's say, some incident, because there were military vessels on both sides, and if the migrants are squeezed in between, I fully agree with all of you that they are the victims. The migrants are the victims, they are victims of traffickers, and perhaps to a certain extent they are victims of a geopolitical situation. And this is what I could document with this Frontex plane in the night from the 18th to the 19th of April. And that's why I sent a letter to the Greek minister. I fully agree that letters are not enough, but I got a reply. And when we had the hearing on the 6th of July with you in the Libe committee, I was still waiting for the reply from the minister that came 4 days later. So that's why I mentioned on the 6th of July that there was suspicious situation. I had in mind this case because the answer was still pending and I could not conclude that there was a, let's say, illegal situation or not while I was waiting for the reply. And then on the 4th of July, I also replied to written questions, and this was the day after I visited Greece and had talks at different level of Greek authorities, and I mentioned also the need and absolutely need to comply with fundamental rights in any activities, and in particular, I insisted on the non-refoulement by sea or at land. So what we can do more in order to increase and not to rely simply on letters and the reply, but I'm sorry, in the system of the European Union, if a government, a national government, if a minister sends a letter to the director of an EU agency and says everything was according to the law, I cannot say I don't trust you because you are the government of this member state. Perhaps there are other mechanisms to investigate. And I'm not sure that the fundamental rights officer is sufficient. Why shouldn't we have? And I really welcome that, for example, the European Ombudsman started a strategic inquiry. This is extremely positive from my perspective. Because, for example, the complaint mechanism can hardly work if there is no involvement of the European Ombudsman in order to press somehow national ombudsman. So this is just an example. Monitoring, I propose to the Fundamental Rights Agency, in order also to have some independent, fully fledged independent, that would not raise any question I'm fully with the members of the parliament that would say that perhaps some monitoring should be done by external entities which are not embedded at Frontex. When it comes to reports, there are some questions whether I would be ready to share reports. I'm ready. As I wrote in the letter to the chair of Libe Committee, if documents are classified or if they are restricted or if Frontex is not the originator of this document, I have to ask and we have to comply with the procedure, but I have no problem. For me, the members of the parliament are the authorities that make the
Mr. Ledzeri, we are in trouble with the timing. We still have an interparliamentary conference to go, so please wrap up and make your final statement, and that'll be all.
Yes, my final statement is that Frontex is fully committed to enhance the fundamental rights monitoring, that we will do with the means we get. They were reduced, as I said, in the establishment plan, 100 posts were withdrawn. This has an impact on all services and all activities, including the fundamental rights. And what I can say is that when we are deploying the standing core, we are putting in place a supervisory mechanism, and the supervisory mechanism will be also a tool in order to make sure that with more staff and category 1 staff on the ground, we will even know more and will get more reports from the situation on the ground. Because for the time being, out of the 600 people who were deployed in Greece during the rapid border interventions, hardly 10 were Frontex staff. The rest was staff deployed by the member states. So that's my final statement, and I remain, of course, available to answer in written form the questions that, unfortunately, I could not answer right now today. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all members of the Parliament.
We thank you, Mr. Ledzeri, Director of Frontex, but let me tell you that you have seen that these issues of alleged pushbacks in the external borders of the European Union with the involvement of the agency is a matter of great concern, and it shouldn't be divisive among the ranks and lines of the Libe Committee, among political groups. It shouldn't be divisive. You should mind that Frontex operations should not be subject to divisive debates within the Libe Committee, but the concern is legitimate. Transparency and full compliance of EU law in all of the operations of the agency in the external borders of the European Union are essential for the Libe Committee, and transparency means that we need to be updated and informed on your initiative on a regular basis. We shouldn't get to know about alleged pushbacks of Frontex agency in the external borders of the European Union by our own means or by the media or by journalists reporting those operations, but regularly by Frontex updating the Libe Committee. And we expect, of course, on these significant matters, that you will do your best to complement the time that you have exceeded largely in every turn that you have used your floor in writing, as for the questions that have been addressed and could not be met because the time restrictions that we are enduring, because this is the way it is, we have to move on. But of course, we appreciate every talk to you, and we will appreciate that you will complete your answers in writing and shortest delay possible.